really serious abuse happening in Bagram, in the main prison. Today, Bagram doesn't really have that sort of abuse, and it's they've really cleaned up their act over there. But some of the abuse has shifted away from Bagram into these small field prisons. There's 9 official field prisons throughout the country on military bases, and they've shifted towards these military bases. And the Red Cross doesn't always have access to all of these sites, and these sites are usually run by Special Operations Forces. So they're more they're out of the public view more than Bagram. So it's a little harder to know what's exactly happening in these places.
Anand Gopal, we're also joined by Scott Horton, an attorney and legal affairs contributor to Harper's Magazine, where he writes the blog No Comments. Scott, as you listen to these descriptions from the night raids to the secret prisons, you've also written about this. What is the legality here?
Well, these acts that are described, particularly things like the water cure, the use of stress positions, sleep deprivation, are clearly illegal. Not only that, the Department of Defense has issued a field manual on authorized interrogation techniques under which these practices, also things like the use of dogs to intimidate prisoners, are clearly forbidden. And the concern here, I think, goes particularly to the involvement of the Joint Special Operations Command, which is running these detention centers. Now, when President Obama on January 22nd issued an executive order shutting down the black sites, the secret prisons, that order was very carefully tailored so that it was only CIA black sites that were closed. So the system of JSOC black sites that exist as have been
special operations.
Exactly, as have been described in Afghanistan, but exist in other places as well. Certainly, they also existed in Iraq, and we have suspicions about Guantanamo, for instance.
What do you mean you have suspicions?
Well, the deaths that occurred on June 9, 2006 occurred at a black site, and there's a big question about who was operating that black site. But it's very, very clear that JSOC was operating a system. Also, it seems clear, and there's very strong evidence to suggest that JSOC itself, or many of its operations, have not been bound to observe the field manual and the rules in the field manual. And the Secretary of Defense gave himself discretion when he issued that field manual to make it inapplicable to specific operations or specific units as he saw fit. So I think that's one of the big questions that's hovering over Afghanistan right now, as well as the questions of transparency and accountability. If the Red Cross doesn't get in, if indeed these operations are classified in secret, that means that there's no reporting and there's no accountability for what goes on there. That creates an environment where abuses fester.
Anand Gopal, you write, the American troops that operate under NATO command have begun to enforce stricter rules of engagement. But you say a simpler way of dancing around the rules is to call in the U.S. Special Operations Forces, the Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and others, which are not under NATO command, so are not bound by the stricter rules of engagement. Can you elaborate on that? And then I want to get Scott's comment.
Yeah, you have Special Operations Forces, and as I said, these are Navy SEALs and Green Berets and the like, and they have completely separate rules of engagement. They're not under the NATO rules of command. So often you'll hear about a military raid or a night raid in some area, and I'll call up the U.S. military representatives, and they'll often have no idea about the raid at all, because there's this complete separation between the operations that the SF are doing and the operations done by conventional military forces. And the Special Operations Forces sort of have a mandate in Afghanistan from their commanders to capture and kill insurgent leaders, and often by using any means, every means at their disposal. So most of these night raids are done by the Special Operations Forces, and most of these small prisons that are done in many of the military bases across the country are run by the Special Operations Forces.
And you write that the people fear the night raids more than they fear the Taliban.
Well, certainly the Taliban, they're not always loved across the country, but they understand local culture, and they understand if they start breaking into people's houses and taking people away, then they'll have rebellions against them. The American military doesn't always understand this at the same level, and so I've been to many villages where they say that the main source of instability in their village is the presence of U.S. military operations, and the biggest fear they have is U.S. soldiers coming into their houses in the middle of the night and taking away their loved ones.
And with the increase of U.S. soldiers, as they're increasing, tens of thousands of them, is this a concern to people in Afghanistan? What have you seen as a result of this?
This is certainly a concern, and we've seen an increasing number of demonstrations over the last 3 or 4 months. We've heard a lot of talk in the summertime from General McChrystal about lessening the number of night raids, but that doesn't look like that's happened. It seems like at least it's continued at the same level. And when you go and talk to Afghans, especially in the rural Pashtun countryside, again and again you hear the same thing, which is that when U.S. troops come into our area, the violence increases because there's more fighting from both sides, and there's more night raids and more of the sort of things that we're afraid of, and therefore we don't want them here.
What has finally the U.S. military said about the black jail at Bagram?
The military said very little about it, and again, this is because there's a shroud of secrecy around almost the whole detention process, and it talks more about the other jail on Bagram, the one that's accessible to the Red Cross, but the black jail, which is run by Special Operations Forces, it hasn't said much about it, and it's very difficult to get any sort of official comment about the jail.
Anand Gopal, I want to thank you very much for being with us, reporting from Afghanistan for the Christian Science Monitor. Then the Wall Street Journal. His latest piece is in the Nation magazine and TomDispatch.org, called America's Secret Afghan Prisons. Scott Horton, I'd like to ask you to stay with us. We're going to go to break, though, first. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace